I just love the title of this session because it encapsulates a lot of what we were hoping to achieve when I first became familiar with the workshop that we're going to be discussing in this session. Let me introduce myself so that out-of-context remark makes a little bit more sense. I'm Mike Kennedy. I am a senior facilitator, as you can see, with Blue Point Leadership Development. And this is actually my first official assignment for Blue Point, which couldn't have made me happier, given that I've had some history with this event as an internal practitioner. So I couldn't imagine a more appropriate way to launch my career on the consulting side of the fence. But going back to my days as a practitioner and leading the learning and leadership development practice with the NBA, leadership development didn't really exist there in a particularly meaningful way until late in 2014. And that's when we started running pilots that took us into our 2015 programming launches. I'll talk in a moment about some of our results. But the reason that I liked our session title is because it connects with what I always saw as the end game of our efforts at the NBA, which was that 10 or 15 years down the road, every homegrown member of the NBA's senior leadership team, which is essentially folks who report directly to the commissioner or deputy commissioner, give or take. And the goal was that every member of that group who came up through the ranks, and figure that would be about 2/3, with some external hires, but that anyone in that internally tenured track would have been shaped by our leadership development function. So to get us on that path, we launched 2 tracks to tip off that function. An advanced leader curriculum, which was basically targeting that next seniority level down from those folks reporting into the commissioner's office, and the NBA Business Academy, which was our programming for high-performing VPs and high-potential directors, and those are more or less the next 2 tiers in the NBA's hierarchy. So the content that we'll be going through here, which is from a program called Breakout, was the core component of that advanced leader forum and was one of the 3 pillars, let's call them, of the Business Academy. The other 2 were programming around business acumen and strategic insight. As I said, the story is still being written, and we might need a little while to get to the ending, sort of like Game of Thrones books, but there's good stuff that's happening in the interim. Obviously, there have been other initiatives in place to help the NBA become a true employer of choice, so I'm not asserting that all of these outcomes stemmed completely from this workshop. But I would be happy to make the case that our decision to adopt this particular workshop was really instrumental to putting us on the path to these outcomes and to putting them within reach to an extent that might not have been replicable without it. In particular, our turnaround, you see that 3rd bullet in internal mobility, and from my perspective as a person who was in the room for literally every minute of every delivery of this workshop at the NBA, very much dependent on discussions we had with senior leaders in that room as part of this process. The fact that I was the primary facilitator each time we ran this at the NBA, by the way, is why I'm here today. When at the end of last year I contacted Blue Point to make the transition and let them know I was leaving the NBA and entering the consulting world, the observation was made that I've facilitated this particular workshop more than anyone else, and that's even more so since I had opened it up about a year and a half ago to team executives as well as league office leaders. So asked if I'd care to keep doing it, which was a very easy yes, because this program was really a highlight for me as a facilitator, always was. I had it circled on my calendar whenever it was coming up. One thing that I loved about this workshop and facilitating it is that it's uniquely non-prescriptive. And this is something that I told people coming into the room right off the bat, that it really credits participants with having enough maturity to know that we don't have predetermined answers to questions about great leadership. What we have is a collaborative experience to help them explore what great leadership looks like for them, for you, or more importantly, for the people that you support as a leader. In keeping with that approach, the workshop is very rich in metaphor and in storytelling and in visual engagement. I actually have facilitated this workshop several times in China, and I always get comments there about how accessible it feels to leaders from Eastern cultures. more so than other types of leadership development or learning that they've experienced that was designed by Westerners. So I thought that was a pretty neat insight. So again, a lot of metaphor, and we'll start with one of the cheetah. And the cheetah is a fascinating animal, and of course, when we think of cheetah, what we think of naturally is speed, is motion, is action, and that is, you know, certainly part of what the cheetah does. But it's not constant action, right? And when we think of it as always in motion and the fastest land animal, we forget that, you know, one thing that the cheetah does, that is an infinitesimal portion of their time is spent at that, whatever the ridiculous rate, you know, 60 miles an hour or whatever. Like, that's few and far between. What we don't see is the moments of the cheetah on the rock and reflecting and preparing and in some feline way strategizing, right? Thinking about when it's going to deploy that energy in the race. Cheetah doesn't have action bias, right? Cheetah is not thinking about whether people are watching and judging cheetah because cheetah is not currently on the run, right? But as humans, we're a little more subject to that, and that's certainly true in leadership as well, where sometimes we're so on the go, and listen, trying times may exacerbate this, that we might fail to do the thing that makes us successful. You know, the cheetah, again, can't expend that energy without having thought about whether it's worth it to expend it in a given moment. By the way, cheetahs are very unlike big cats in some interesting ways that I didn't know about until recently. So do yourself a favor and do an internet search for cheetahs and dogs. If you've never done that, just cheetahs and dogs. You're welcome. Anyway, so it's one of the great metaphors, and again, some premises that we really put front and center in this program as well, because again, it's not about rules or frameworks, but principles, premises, experiments. This is how we really want to advance the thinking in the room about leadership and what leadership can be. It is everyone's business. We all have some aspect of leadership that we're accountable for, and it happens one conversation at a time. And these are things, again, you know these things in all likelihood, right? But don't take for granted the extent to which others don't think about them, about the fact that every moment we share is an opportunity to grow, for the person that we're supporting as a leader to grow, and for us to grow as leaders and grow that relationship. I love this idea that what we're looking at is the best version of you. This is fundamental to what this course does, is establish that, you know, sometimes this best version of you gets distorted, and sometimes it gets distorted actually when we talk about authentic leadership, right? And that's been a big and common term, and I don't want to, speak against the idea of authenticity. It's important, but it also might be a little bit too low of a bar, right? Because you don't get to, for example, be a jerk just because you want to claim that's your authentic self. So yes, authenticity matters, but that authenticity matters to the extent that you're deploying it in service of becoming that best version of yourself and the leader that the people that you serve need you to be. So this is a question that we come back to again and again during this program, is what does that best version of you look like? It's not the same for every person in the room. That's not the aspiration of the program. That shouldn't be any leader's goal, right? It's not cookie cutter. And another way that we start to establish that, even before folks come into the room, is with the pre-work for the workshop. And it is a 360, and so we have people complete the leadership feedback report. And in some ways, it isn't terribly different. If you've worked with 360s, I'm personally, and having again delivered this many times, my colleagues at the NBA, we took a lot of pride in the broader talent management team led by the chief talent officer there, and I was on the weak end of the academic pool, having only a master's in counseling psychology, as I had folks with doctorates and masters in industrial and organizational psych, like very people with a lot of academic training and rigor in their backgrounds, and all of them uniformly told me that it wasn't just me, that when I said I was impressed by the thoroughness of this report, that there was a reason for it, and that it really cleared the bar that a lot of other 360 reporting does. And I want to note that it may sound like it contradicts the idea that we're not giving strict standards to meet or follow in this program, and that it's non-prescriptive because it's a 360 and people are being assessed against these 40 items. But here's some important context that we share very explicitly with participants, which is that there's no right result. The tool asks how often behaviors are observed. That's it. Okay. All the behaviors in the assessment are considered positive in as much as they're all ways to earn permission from the people that you support as a leader to lead them. It's actually kind of useless in and of itself, though, because any given item is only relevant to the extent that the leader understands how important it is to the people being led. One of the items, for example, is smiles. That's it. That's the item. And if that's 40th out of 40 on your list in terms of where you score, is that bad? Is it good? There's no standalone answer to the question. It matters only to the extent that the behavior earns you permission to lead. If the other 39 behaviors earn you more permission, then go forth and prosper, right? Maybe you can smile a little more, and that's okay, but don't do it at the expense of other things on the list that do a better job earning you that permission. So this is an idea we come back to again and again. The information in the report is there to help leaders check the perceptions of them against what really matters for them and for the teams that they lead, that they support as a leader. How am I earning permission to lead, and how are those things working for me and for them? Not, am I a good leader or a bad leader, but what are the gaps for me to close so that I can become that best version that I want to be and that they want me to be? So then we have our, waiting while that's all getting done and getting us. Usually it's about 3 weeks in advance, at least at the NBA that I would send out that pre-work and 2 weeks for completion. And then people would be prepared as we got into the room for breakout. You may have seen on an earlier slide, by the way, one of the things that I was proud of was that our first run, which was again with my SVP level when we first rolled this program out, which is really that next layer down from that senior leadership team I mentioned before. Again, they were so unfamiliar with leadership training that the idea of pre-work kind of bounced off them, so only about half of them did it beforehand, which I fully expected. But after participating in the workshop, there was 98% completion rate when we allowed them to go back and do it after the fact. And that to me spoke about the power, once they saw the benefit and experienced what we were talking about in that room, that gave them some real motivation to go and gather that information. So that was always a great starting point for what we were thinking about in this workshop. And another thing that I want to acknowledge, this particular slide, it looks like others in the workshop, but it's a little bit different in as much as this is of the moment. And we always would tip off the workshop with some discussion of what's happening in the world or in people's worlds right now, because again, given the nature of the program, it requires an acknowledgement that leadership never exists out of context. So in that spirit, it's important to acknowledge for us right now, for the group, I'm not talking abstractly about participants that I've dealt with in the past, I'm talking about the people listening to this right now. It's important for us to acknowledge that we've been dealt a hand that we can't even see just yet. We don't know what cards we're holding. But we do know that leadership, and certainly the kind of leadership that we promote in this workshop, is never more important than in moments where we and the people that we support feel deprived of clarity. And so again, not to be opportunistic about touting the benefits of leadership as we experience a crisis, but the reality, as we've all seen, is that leadership crises expose good leadership and expose poor leadership. And as people come out of crises, that's when we have to start thinking about, how are we prepared to help people move into the new place that they're going to need to move into as they come out of this crisis and recover, work through it and recover. So I would encourage you to think about your world today. And when you think about it, what is it that you believe you can take forward with you when the most acute part of this crisis has passed, right? When those conditions that make it impossible to know what the future is going to look like or where we're headed, once some of that has passed, what are you taking forward? I saw an essay recently from someone who wrote about feeling resentful of some of the self-help stuff, advice that she's seen kicking around, suggesting that everyone should take this time to master a new skill or something, and saying like, isn't it hard enough just to get through the day without putting that pressure on myself that I have to come out a better person or something? And I get that. I agree with that. It's not the goal. But at the same time, we are all being shaped by what's happening around us, and so are people that we support as leaders. And so just what kind of context can we create for ourselves so that we're taking things forward that are valuable to us to take forward? I mean, listen, Geoffrey Chaucer, you may remember as the author of the Canterbury Tales. Chaucer's experience with social distancing during the plague outbreak in the 14th century was instrumental to his writing of the Canterbury Tales. Centuries later, many people think that the plague outbreak in the 17th century precipitated Isaac Newton's greatest work and discoveries. Now, again, that's not the bar. We're not saying that Chaucer and Newton are the people that you should feel dissatisfied with yourself if you don't live up to those achievements, right? But what can we be prepared to offer the world or our own corners of the world as leaders as we move toward an uncertain future? And hopefully we feel like that degree of self-mastery is something that we can aspire to as we think toward a new kind of future that will demand the kind of leadership that we were already thinking was the best way forward, right? And so when we think about what that way looks like, at the heart of the breakout workshop, I was going to say framework, but I don't even think that word really applies. But we do have these areas of practice that we focus on, and again, it's based on the premise of let's experiment, understand these premises, understand how these can help you continue to earn that permission from the people you support as a leader, and then experiment with using these practices in the way that's going to best earn you their consent, right? So we talk about intensifying passion and purpose, and look at that really on a few levels. That's the practice area that I'll spend the greatest amount of time on as we move through the content. Deepening connections and conversations, making sure that there is a sense of community within the people that you lead, and helping that be a platform for their success, as well as helping them multiply their contributions and development, participating as a performance and development coach. And finally, moving people through change and innovation. And again, I'll spend some time on a couple of key things there, because again, certainly those premises are something that if you can take advantage of some of the thought leadership contained in this program, so much the better, right? So, so let me begin with passion and purpose. And by the way, I want to say this about the program too. It's extremely interactive and activity driven, and basically, there's such a use of storytelling and understanding how the levels of vulnerability and getting a handle on your own path and how you've become the leader that you are. We spend so much time on those things early on in the program, and it's a 2-day workshop. At least as designed. Obviously, there's always opportunities to adapt things for customization purposes. But I have never gotten into the quote-unquote content, meaning these 4 practice areas, before the second half of the first day. And by the way, another aspect of the program is just that I can't, when people say like, what time? Obviously I'll time it so that there are breaks at good intervals, but like, I don't know, we might spend, probably the best version of this program that I ever delivered, of again, I would say somewhere north of 24 times that I facilitated it. Probably what I consider the single best delivery was one where we didn't get to this until day 2. Because a group of high potential directors actually was so engaged with some of that process of developing self-awareness around how you'd become a leader and how not to become a leader, that we really dug in on that. And it was not a big deal, because a lot of that conversation accelerated. It was really just foreshadowing things that we were going to talk about when we got into these areas of practice. as you'll see when I show my passions, I love a little flexibility in design. Anyway, when we talk about passion and purpose, it's the purpose being the reason for the journey, but passion being the fire that lights a way, and knowing that both of these are critical components. One thing that can come up in these conversations, again, there are a lot of visuals to help inspire some new thinking and reframing and storytelling, and I'll show a bunch of them. I won't necessarily have a lot of points to make around all of them, but this is one certainly where we know some of the inspiration for this program comes from some of Marshall Goldsmith's work, and we know Marshall, of course, in What Got You Here Won't Get You There, in that book, talking about the things, the contributor qualities, the great contributor qualities that can detract from your ability to lead people effectively. And many of us come into, and our passions direct us toward contributing in ways that make us very capable as lone wolves. But that has to be part of what the leader begins to put aside. I don't think I've ever been prouder of any of the people that I helped grow as a leader than I was of a brilliant gentleman at the NBA who has, I'll just say, has risen. If you're even a casual sports fan, I'm guessing that 10 years from now, you'll know his name. At an earlier point in his career, he said, while in this workshop, and as we talked about this, he said, I had a boss who didn't care, as you'll see, fundamentally opposed to a lot of the premises of this program. He said, a person who didn't really seem to care about me as a person, who didn't really contribute to my growth, was really just very much an execution manager. And I performed really well in that job. And so we talked that through, and I said, listen, you can be very successful doing that if you plan on hiring versions of yourself exclusively, people who are at the top of the scale in many of these things, including self-motivation. And that really stuck with him, and at the time, I think he led a team of maybe 3 or 4 people. He's now got a team of, I'd say, 30 or so people. And the moment that I was proud of him was when I spoke to him, maybe a year or so ago, and he told me that he loved his job, and he had just really started to love his job, and that the thing that happened to make him love it was looking out. We were in his office, and he waved out to where his department is located. He said, the day that I realized I care more about all of them being successful than myself being a successful contributor was the day that I started to be happy. And listen, I've seen the engagement results. I know that was also when the people in his department got happier too, right? And some of that flows from right off the bat from this sense of passion and purpose. So we really, we deal with this on 3 levels. And I'm sorry, I didn't show the lone wolf, the actual graphic that I was talking about. I got so caught up in my story. But this really happens on 3 levels in this program that we talk about. The level of passion and purpose, first off, connecting with your own sense of passion and purpose, which is a prerequisite to the leadership aspect of passion and purpose, right? So first level, self-awareness, and then there's the leader's recognition of how he or she shows up when those things may be flagging. And finally, there's the leader's readiness to engage with the team to explore their own personal passions and collective sense of purpose. So I'll tell you that one of the things that we would have done with you all had we gotten to convene in person for this session would have been to have you do the passion identification, which is, if you're familiar with a card sort methodology, we use that approach. So if you can imagine having these 56 items on cards, and very briefly, I'll describe sort of how we get from this to well, I'll show you mine to this result, which is the 5 most important to you, and then the 6th one that's considered a trade-off, meaning the thing that's important to you and helps animate you, but that when push comes to shove, you might be able to put that to the side if the others are fulfilled. And so, by the way, let me go back so you can see a little more clearly, again, all 56 of these items. One of my favorite moments was doing this in Beijing, and as you get people, if you've done a card sort, you know how it works. You get people to winnow it down, and you sort of don't tell them until a little later on how many things they're going to be allowed to keep at the end of the day. But as they were paring down, there was one point when the guy had both numbers, what is it, 18 family and 22 freedom in the handful that he was choosing from, and a guy leaning over to him and saying, "Dude, you can't have both of those at the end." So so I found that amusing. Anyway, as a father of 4, by the way. Anyway. So use that process again to get a handle on where you are. I admit to my participants when I do this that when my job changed in 2009, actually, let me stay back on mine for a sec. That when my job changed in the last major recession, I failed the test. I failed the people I was supposed to be leading because that job change left a lot of these things on the table for me. And I did. I didn't live up to being the best version of myself for the people that I supported as a leader in that situation. On the upside, I hope it gave me some perspective that I could learn from. And a fairly senior leader came to me during a break in this workshop after going through this module and told me that he finally understood that he was the source of morale problems on his team that he had spent a year or two trying to figure out. In his case, he loved the work, but as a leader became so detached from it that he wasn't getting to indulge his sense of passion anymore. And it actually led to a really good win-win solution of him being a little bit more trusting of folks on his team to do some of his quote-unquote senior leader stuff and let him get back into the mix on some of the more operational work as well in strategic ways. And so that was one example of the ways that this can be helpful, even not just at the team level, but on the individual level when self-awareness really can drive some decision making about how you're, again, showing up as a leader. And then helping people think through their own passions and connecting with their shared sense of compelling purpose. So at the end of the day, again, we want to take people to the place where they have that understanding of why it's important to pursue conversations about what people do find interesting and compelling in what they do, how much is that satisfied in their work, right? And then use that more collectively to drive that sense of compelling purpose. I'm sure folks have heard the story, which is probably apocryphal, of JFK speaking to the NASA janitor and asking him, "What do you do here?" and him saying, I helped put a man on the moon. But I know that this story isn't apocryphal, that this actually came out of this workshop, that a group of folks who previously would have identified themselves as people who work in an old folks home or something along those lines, if I remember the quote correctly, but that working through this idea came up with something that is a pretty different proposition to leave home in the morning and head in for work when this is the way you frame what you're doing there, right? So this is the kind of journey that we want to be able to take people on and create that sense of compelling purpose and help them create it together. So it's very much shared. And then again, now that the obligation of the leader in this process is also to connect. Find ways to help connect people to the sense of their passions and that shared purpose. And listen, we may very easily take for granted that people understand the value of knowing what animates and inspires their team. We may take it for granted because I think those of us that are likely to be participating in this symposium, have been exposed to why this is such an important thing. But it's very surprising if you get out and about to find how much people may resist really inquiring about these things. One leader, a very affable guy, well-liked. I would have called him both very emotionally intelligent and technically highly proficient, designing technology products that I could barely even hold in my brain what these things do. But who had a little bit of a turnover problem. And at some point when we were talking through something along these lines, he was just like, I couldn't possibly ask people if they like what they do. It was like, wait a minute. And to give him credit, he turned his ship around quickly once we got to the good stuff. But you think about that, he didn't even want to know about the stuff that he could make better because he was fearful. He was so concerned about there being some that he couldn't make better. right? It's once I know about it, I'm obligated. That the idea that once I know someone has a passion, I'm obligated to find a way for them to fulfill it, and that's not what we're saying. But it's almost like he fooled himself into thinking that the dissatisfaction didn't really exist if he didn't know about it, right? And so, you know, this guy is as far as you could get from being a bad guy or a dumb guy. He was just a guy who was never challenged to turn his attention toward that blind spot. Again, you can turn those people around, but you have to understand that they have that resistance and maybe were never challenged in that way before. So that's getting us through the passion and purpose practice area. That's day one, folks. That's as far as we get usually. Again, even if it goes sort of by the numbers. And then again, some other areas, and these in some ways might have a little bit more familiarity. So I won't get as much into detail when we talk about, you know, some of the premises in particular and things that we experiment with, but certainly ideas again that conversations are the foundation upon which your leader relationships are built, and that these elements do create these profound connections, that the appreciative orientation, empathy, responsible transparency, and the servant's heart. And I'll say that you know, this is a place where, as happened several times in the program, but this is a place where I can tell people, I wouldn't list it on the outcome page, but I consider a positive outcome that I've had situations where people said, listen, hearing about this and really engaging with this subject matter helped me realize that I'm not particularly well equipped to lead people in this way, and what does that mean for me? And I've had a couple of people take the off-ramp and say, like, I want to move into a role where maybe I'm managing very few people and delivering more thought leadership to the organization than I am people management. And listen, I think that's a very positive outcome when people develop that level of self-awareness about what might be out of the realm of possibility for them at any given point in time. So if they can't fulfill that, you know, people's desire to be heard, if they can't commit themselves to the level of attention and focus required to fulfill that obligation as leaders, if their sympathy, right, the being cognitively sorry for people doesn't also open the door to empathy and having an emotional connection to their experiences, then maybe it's not the best, leadership isn't the best path for them, or people leadership in that way as opposed to more thought leadership, right? And so this is, again, that's practice area number 2. We move into practice area number 3, multiplying contribution and development. And this, to that point again, that the growth and development of people, if seeing that profound connections slide and talking that through wasn't a trigger for people to think through whether they really want to be on the leader path, then this is a second opportunity to have that conversation by helping people realize, as my friend did when he realized that the success of his team and the satisfaction of his team was his highest calling. Like, is that a thing that you can organize your mind and work life around? Because if you can't, then again, leadership might not be the path for you to be on. And then we get into more nuts and bolts. Listen, you know, I think this is going to be very familiar to folks, so I don't want to take valuable time talking about coaching and talent development. Needless to say, I mean, actually, some of you at some point along the lines have heard me talk about experiential activity and the occasional misuse of experiential activity. I will say in this program there's a lot of it, and it is well done. It's not role plays that are there to quote unquote practice these behaviors so that you can go off and do it, which I'm skeptical about, but they're there to serve as opportunities to experiment and have proof of concept. And so you don't play someone who's coaching someone. We find ways to do coaching in the room, peer coaching, and keep those peer coaching groups together after the fact as well. So, or post-program, so that they form a community of practice, a small community of practice. I'll say more about that in a few moments. but focus is here, moving past being an advisor, supervisor to a performance coach, and helping people recognize, first off, what does coaching mean? Because we've run into some folks who say, yeah, coaching is the process of helping a person do something exactly the way you would do it. Whoa, whoa, whoa. So we do. That is why we define the terms and make sure people have a handle on them as we go as well. And then the last practice area, accelerating change and innovation, a couple that I didn't get through. So accelerating change and innovation. Innovation, there's an opportunity to, as a group, to spend some time working on an innovation project. We do invite people to think about areas where some peer collaboration might help them move a project along. So that's really the way that time is devoted to innovation in the room. And one of the, again, a lot of premises more so than rules, right? And the premise that innovation isn't the tools and technology. Innovation is about the people that are going to be the beneficiaries of innovation, and always understanding that innovation is limited if the human element isn't present and you're thinking that through, right? But when we talk about leading change and the challenge of leading change, which, boy, it was already a hard thing to to get people to say no. I don't. That sort of trick question. Like, does anyone not deal with a lot of change? We don't get a lot of hands raising for that, and I think we're going to have even fewer of them now, right? So people do tend to lean forward. And starting out with the idea that we know, and I know that many of you have seen statistics on this from consultancies and others that say that many, if not most, change programs fail, and often it is because the time is spent on, here's the great new thing that we're moving towards. So there's push, but there's not a lot of pull. What are we trying to get away from, right? So when we think about change, here's the way I handle this very brief conversation in this program. I do give me the show of, not show of hands, but show of fingers, right? So you got 5 fingers on your hand. Put up the number of fingers that represents on a scale of 1 to 5, how much, and just very simple, like don't overthink it, just how resistant are people to change? And I usually get an average of 4. Sometimes a wise guy will put up, his other hand with a couple of fingers on that one. But then I say, okay, leave the hand in the air. Don't worry about the fingers anymore, but leave the hand in the air, but put it down when I say something that applies to you. And it's just like, you've gotten married, you've started a family, you've bought a home, you've moved from one city to another, you've changed careers, and I probably never get 5 questions in before hands go down. And it gives me the chance to point out to people, listen, you've embraced those changes. Those are changes that you pursued. So it's worth thinking about the fact that we tell ourselves people resist change, and yet as humans, we're actually wired for it. We like novelty. Now, other species don't. That cheetah we saw before, that cheetah would love for everything to go exactly the way, like I rest for a day or two, then I eat, then I run, then I eat. Like that's all cheetah wants. Or to cuddle with dogs. Again, call back to that point. But but people are wired for novelty. We want new things, and so we don't naturally resist change. We get bored, and people have embraced change for various reasons. And so when we think about people being quote-unquote resistant to change, we need to go a little deeper on that in order to really think about what does it mean that we consider people resistant to change. So why is it so difficult? And Greg Thompson started Bluepoint. One of his insights delivered in his program is that and this is in his article, The Big Lie, was really to identify that it's ultimately that people don't want to be unimportant, they don't want to seem like they're lacking in proficiency, and they don't want to lose autonomy. And those are the real risks that people experience, or the real drivers of people's insecurity and seeming resistance to change. And it's great. I always provide a few minutes and say, like, true? I mean, can you think of things? Yes, you can break those down into smaller categories, right? But generally, anything that you can identify, at least in my experience of challenging people to push back against this, everything does really roll up into one of these three things. And so again, if you're just jumping ahead to a future state in trying to sell and lead change, that probably glosses over at least some portion of these things. By the way, you know, as someone pointed out to me who was helping lead the change from an interim retail location that we operated at the NBA to a new full-time one, but that was also being operated by a partner instead of the league office itself. That was a big change for those folks. And he said, listen, this is great because it helps me know what to focus on, but it also doesn't, like, I can't go back and tell them these things are untrue. So it's not saying, well, people will be reassured as long as you can tell them they're still important, they're still capable, and they're not going to lose any of their autonomy. Like, but in change, those things may be changing. It's just, this helps you focus on how to get people into the best place, you know, relative to their own circumstances, right? And so, the change model, the leading change model that speaks to those points is sort of the capstone for this part of the program. Of course, and we're nearing the end of the actual content here, and of course, as any workshop that you spend a couple of days in is going to want to do, we're going to encourage people to spend a little bit of time on thinking through what major things they're going to take away that can contribute to their continued growth on the journey. I mentioned before that we do form peer coaching groups, triads, or sometimes I use quads at the NBA, but folks who are going to hold each other accountable and have regular check-ins. And in fact, this was a protocol that I built at the NBA that is now something I think that we consider a feature of the program, which is to have some, and again, this you know, can and should vary with environment, you know, what works best for you in your company, and if it's a public workshop, we're going to give people, again, some tools and resources to hold these conversations even at a distance. You may work in a company, you know, on the West Coast. Another person might work in a company on the East Coast. Another might work in Europe. Who knows? But we'll give you some tools and means to continue using that peer coaching relationship as a path to continued growth. You can see a combination of meetings with one's manager, review meetings, planning. At the NBA, I also created a set of follow-up seminars that kicked in after 6 months, so that people had sort of a 2-year path to continuous development. And certainly, there are opportunities to help build these kinds of pathways for anyone that's interested in this type of work. And of course, the opportunity to possibly repeat the 360 and see how you're doing. It's always a great thing to be able to check back in, as again, Goldsmith wrote about in Leadership as a Full Contact Sport. Was that the name of the article? So very quickly, you know, winding down that content, I do, you know, want to at least promote Bluepoint a little more broadly and say again, folks, I'm new to that to Bluepoint as a facilitator, but I've got, you know, half a decade of experience working with them, and so I say this, believe me, I am very picky was very picky about my vendors and am very picky about my partners, and so you know, I was really pleased to come aboard with Bluepoint because of some of what I have seen in their capabilities and designing, first off, best-in-class virtual learning programs. This particular program has not been designed to the virtual environment yet, and I say that with admiration. I believe it should and will be when we have some interest in it, but there wasn't a rush to get it there because there are some features of it that are really going to require some deep thinking and creativity to get into a virtual platform, and so I'm very grateful that this particular one is one that everyone acknowledged, you know, with some feedback from people like me who teach or use the program, that said, let's make sure that we're getting that right instead of making it virtual just because we can. But there are, you know, many offerings in the Bluepoint catalog that have been virtualized and are very effective. And so, you know, part of the key to that success is part of the Bluepoint methodology. So having very clear objectives for participants, Great subject matter expertise. Again, I've always been uniformly impressed by the content that I've worked with, but also, of course, by the design of the content that I've worked with, where you know, it always felt like it was flexible enough for me as a facilitator to create that interactive environment and use real world, you know, real experiences, real storytelling, and tailor it not only for the group beforehand, but be able to tailor it in the room. And good design does that for you in my experience. Continuous learning, again, pre-work, online resources, assignments afterwards, taking advantage of the relationships that you build in the room to keep you accountable to your growth and the path that you're on. Facilitators, you make your own decision about me, but coaches, I have to say, as I might have mentioned, I'm trained as a counseling, as a psychotherapist, cognitive behavioral psychotherapist, and while I have a professional coach certification, I've never pursued the ICF levels. Just never something that I've again felt with my background that I needed to be as focused on. I don't make the cut for being a master coach as a result of that. Again, which I appreciate. I like the commitment to quality that Bluepoint has demonstrated to me over time, and the media has been uniformly great. I love the design of the things that I've worked with in this program, and the other things that I've seen delivered from Bluepoint. So anyone who has spoken to me about them beforehand would tell you that I have said I am an unabashed fan of this organization, and that has only carried through as I've been given the opportunity to represent the organization in certain ways. So with that, I'm at the point where, as in the program would say, we want to appreciate the journey that we've been on and be thankful for that journey, and thank you for your attention, and challenge you to think about, what single thing, again, let's make the most of having spent this time together. So what can you do today that's going to be the biggest contributor to being that best version of yourself as a professional and as a leader? What is, not only as a leader, but also for yourself, what is the most important thing for you to be that best version for who means the most to you in your holistic life, right? You can find Bluepoint in the usual places online, and I know we're going to transition to a live Q&A. So thank you for your attention up to this point.
And hi, folks. Hopefully, it looks like I'm out of mute and doing this successfully. So, thanks for your attention through the program thus far. And I'm going to take a crack at answering some of the last couple of questions that came through that I didn't get to while I was typing online. And thanks for the questions. So, very quickly, while at the NBA was a question from Steve. Thank you for the question. While at the NBA, was this the core of the content for leadership development? And I think after you asked the question, I said a little more about that in the recording. We did, I would say that it was the core of content in two ways. It was the core of what we offered as far as leadership, people leadership within our high potential programming, and that it was the core for a more advanced level of leadership development. Over time, we developed a transitional set of programming. So we had a different content that we made available to people as they ascended to different levels of responsibility within the organization. And for the more senior levels, this was then the follow-up programming. So it was pretty fundamental. And as you saw in the sustainability, there was a set of programs that we developed, but we developed them very specifically based on the 360 that was part of the Advanced Leader Forum, as we called it. So we did deeper dives on things and helped people develop a learning path based on that 360 so that they would attend whichever of the follow-ups. Again, I think it was about a dozen in that curriculum, half-day programs that would help them go deeper on whatever they had uncovered in the 360. And that brings us to another question that came through, which was about sustainability and what our best practices were. And so, as I mentioned, some of that follow-up programming, we had a regimen that we asked people to continue with. We did organize people into peer coaching groups, triads or quads in the program, that was their day 2 seating assignment. So I would have them already in pods with the people that were going to be their peer coaches and accountability partners. And we gave them essentially monthly or bi-monthly assignments to talk to either their manager or their peer group and discussion guides for those. And that went on, again, roughly every 1 to 2 months for 8 months. But the dirty little secret, if you want to call it that, is that every one of those discussion guides pointed them back to the people that they supported as leaders, where we asked them to, check in with those folks first. And I mentioned Goldsmith inspired this program in some ways, and in that article about leadership being a full contact sport, the finding was a great finding that at the end of the day, the leaders following up, it doesn't really matter all that much what you do. Maybe that's the dirty little secret. But at the end of the day, what really matters is the extent to which the leaders follow up on their learning with the people that they support as leaders and check in on how they're doing. So that was built into every one of those discussion guides. This, first check with your team, find out what they think about some of the steps that you've taken and the behaviors that you've implemented or experimented with, and then take that back into your discussion with your manager, with your peer group, or for that matter, with the facilitator in whatever programs we've recommended for you to follow up on this. So we found that there was a really nice holistic means of people following through on their learning efforts. And it also gave me a couple of years, honestly, worth of programming. We had people that we could say, listen, we've got now a 2-year plan for you, and that's again for a company the size that we were in the NBA, I felt like that was a pretty solid offering for people. Let's see, I'm trying to see. Thank you for noting that all the best leaders have a guitar in the room. That's entirely correct as far as I'm concerned. Not to be uninclusive, but this is my backup guitar. I couldn't bring myself to bring my my Martin down from the top part of my residence where I'm broadcasting from today. See a few questions. I think looks like we've gotten and a final note as I know we're coming up on end of time as well. Please, if you have further questions, you can contact me. My email address is mkennedy@bluepointleadership.com. And beyond that, though, I would highly encourage you to visit the Blue Point booth in the exhibit hall. Love to have you there. Lots of great resources. As I said, I'm new to the Blue Point team as a member of it, but as a user of it and a practitioner, have nothing but good things to say. So I would encourage you to stop by, and please again reach out to me. I love to hear from my colleagues in the field.